have nipples. Can you milk me?
Well, you're male, so no. But App is female, so we could probably milk her.
I don't consent to that.
Well, animals don't consent to milking, so I guess that means you can't either. So,
I'm not the same as an animal here.
okay, but do animals have rights?
They certainly have some.
Well, what rights should animals have?
I think we might need to start by defining rights and animals, because a lot of things could fit into those categories.
So I'm thinking rights and protections for animals, because I think that there's a difference between rights of what we can do to animals, the rights that animals have, and the protections that animals should have. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that when we're talking about animals here, we're talking about non-human animals.
So
like
what defines an animal?
So for this context, I'm going to go with something that has neurological function and has some ability to make decisions and do what it needs to survive.
So a jellyfish is not an animal.
They lack most neurological function.
They have no neural system.
Yeah. They have the ability to take in sensory input and act on it to an extent, but I'm going to draw a very fuzzy line somewhere past jellyfish, but before insects, where insects have the ability to make certain decisions.
So for instance, ants. Do ants have rights?
I mean, we're about to discuss that, but I think they should be considered animals.
And I agree with that.
Would you agree that it's to a different extent, that ants probably should not have the same rights as cows or horses?
I would agree with that. I think there needs to be either a tiered system or some distinctions made of the more intelligent a creature, the more rights it should have. That's kind of how we as humans deem ourselves to have so many rights, as in some ways we're more intelligent than quote-unquote animals.
So if intelligence is the primary factor of determining whether or not an animal has a right, is that just a way for us to say, well, we are the most intelligent animal, and so we have the most rights? It feels kind of arbitrary to use intelligence.
I think, well, we've put ourselves in this position because, to our knowledge, we are the first animal to evolve to the point where we can ask ourselves these questions and start to give ourselves these rights. So to an extent, we need to consider rights and our ability. We as humans are still just biological creatures. We follow the same kind of set of boundaries, and we act upon our sensory input just the same as animals do. But we have, I guess, we've evolved beyond the point where we simply take in input and produce output. We have consider things.
We have more complex interactions with the world, and we can have mental faculties that are separate from the world, not just the direct sensory input. So for instance, we can just close our eyes and think to ourselves. And so kind of I think what you're getting at is that as arguably the most intelligent species on the planet, we have a responsibility to maintain that and put an actual structure into recognizing the rights that various animals have.
Yeah. And I do very much think that intelligence plays into that. Taking a look at in that if we're going to look at the top bucket of animals that are non-humans, things that come to mind are dolphins, octopi, gorillas. Horses are quite smart too. Dogs can be very smart. And oftentimes we attribute the intelligence of an animal based on what it's able to perform compared to a human of a certain age.
In terms of problem solving,
Yeah.
as well as just, I think a lot of times, emotional recognition.
So yeah, that's a big one.
Dogs are very well known for being able to recognize emotions and interject. They can be trained to it. Horses are also very good at sensing emotions and acting upon them.
Yeah, and there's also not only sensing emotions, but you take a look at gorillas and other apes where they have the ability to not only sense them, but feel them. There are many documented cases where gorillas will make themselves known as, I'm feeling sad right now, or something happened and that makes me feel very sad.
So emotion seems to be correlated with the higher your intelligence, the more emotional capabilities you have.
Yeah, or in the case of Vulcans, your capabilities to suppress said emotions.
Maybe that's our next step in evolution.
We'll see.
So as neurological function increases in complexity, arguably the number of rights increases.
Right.
Or the degree to which those rights are and protections can be executed increase. I think that there's an inherent value there that intelligence is valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is not necessarily the best form of life propagation. Intelligence allows you to prepare for the future and not just act in the moment. That's kind of what you were talking about with immediate sensory input. We can recognize that there are patterns in the sensory input and predict when further inputs will come to be able to avoid things like storms. So building shelters to prepare for things. And that is arguably a good way of surviving. However, if you just look at other forms of life, for instance, infections, they just replicate as much as possible, and it's very, very hard to completely eradicate infections. So the reason I'm bringing this up is I think that we're implicitly putting a value on intelligence as a form of propagating life.
I'm putting value on intelligence as the method of deeming rights. Without any sort of advanced intelligence that can sit and question what a right is, then rights, the whole discussion becomes meaningless.
But the reason I ask is, why is it intelligence and not successfulness of propagation?
The entire ability to consider and take an abstract concept like a right and then start to assign it value. Because a right is a completely an abstracted concept from the world. If you look at pure animal kingdom without any humans or anyone involved, does a lion have the right to eat an antelope because it needs to survive? Does an antelope have the right not to be eaten? Does it really matter if no one can consider what a right is and take a look at the abstract concept?
So what you're saying is that as we gain the ability to recognize the concept of a right, it is our duty as a species that has the mental faculties to be able to consider it, that it's our duty to define, act, and preserve those rights to the best of our abilities.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're doing here is we are defining rights, but now we are going to try to talk through how we assign those and what kind of values we place on different functions and abilities of animals.
And the assignment in general is associated with neurological capability, at least to some degree. I think as you get higher and higher, it becomes a little bit more wishy-washy.
Yeah. And it is tough to say that assigning rights based purely on intelligence is the perfect measure, because arguably we are very biased, and it is through this intelligence that we are then assigning value.
But it's kind of arbitrary that, we're the most intelligent, and so therefore we just shouldn't eat any of ourselves. That cannibalism is out of the question because we're all equal at the top, and anything below us can come into question. That it seems to me like as we are basically at the top of the food chain, there are things that will eat us, but we can
not
generally
being hunted.
Exactly. We're not regularly hunted, and for instance, okay, there might be a shark attack. Yeah, but we can avoid that, and we can also fight back against that. And I think that we eat more sharks than sharks eat us. And the things that can eat us, so for instance, mountain lions have attacked people. We have the capability, if we wanted to eat more of them than they would eat of us. And I think that kind of arbitrarily puts us at the top of the food chain. Therefore, since we're at the top, it is our duty to be an arbiter of that food chain.
Yeah, and it is important to note when we're talking about the concept of a food chain, to our knowledge, at least as far as I'm aware, we are the only... We break the pattern of the rest of the food chain. If you look at a standard food chain from, I'm going to keep using the safari example, you have antelopes and lions. There is an exponential difference in the number of lions per antelope. And so as you go up the chain, every tier above the last is going to be much smaller. Whereas with humans, we are very, very populous. We outnumber almost any one of our prey.
No, that is not true
almost
at all.
Any.
So, for instance, just
I'm talking
feed
about
animals. So for instance, things that we normally eat could be considered our prey. So chicken could be considered our prey, and I believe there are many times as many chickens.
There are many chickens, but we break the norm in many regards by being so populous, and we have artificially inflated the size of the chain below, of the link below us, purely for consumption.
I think that's a good point to bring up, is that we are managing actively and mentally the food chain, that we recognize that there is a level below us and we need to cultivate that level to be able to continue to eat into the future. And I think that's the idea, that being able to predict the future and think about the future and plan for it is part of what makes us valuable at the top of the food chain.
Yeah, delayed gratification is kind of key to maintaining an artificial food chain.
And I would agree with that. So, but all of this assumes that it's okay that we continue to eat animals. If we recognize that we are the arbiters of the food chain, or that we are getting to the point where we can start planning for the protection of species, to preserve species, if we are those arbiters, shouldn't we not eat animals? Shouldn't we just eat vegetables?
Well, we need to deem what not being eaten, how big of a right that is, and to which tier does that apply? Does that apply to ants, or should we not eat ants, or should we not eat?
Right, because folks are probably more likely to eat a chicken than a dog in the United States.
Yeah. And that's partly because we have formed such a strong bond with dogs through many thousands of years.
Chickens were also domesticated, I think, around the same time as dogs.
In a different extent. They were domesticated as
pets.
They
were domesticated in China as pets.
That's fair.
And it's different from the domestication of dogs, and I realized that dogs are also significantly cuter.
Cuter and arguably more useful.
Right, because you could have a guard dog. You can use it to help herd livestock.
Yeah, hunting dogs.
Let's be honest. Chickens are high-order vegetables. You can chop their head off, and as long as you keep putting food down the throat hole,
for a few weeks.
They'll be fine for a while. For a few weeks. You would not last without your head for a few weeks.
I mean, you accomplish it pretty well.
Ooh, ouch. All right. So bringing it back to being arbiters of animals in general, I would argue that in terms of sheer numbers and the goal of life, naturally, the natural goal of life is to reproduce itself. Do you agree with that?
I think that's reasonable.
Survival and
survival of yourself and propagation of your species.
Well, propagation just goes back to survival of the species.
Survival of the species. That is the primary goal. I would argue that the animals that are most likely to survive the longest are the ones that we eat.
I mean, cockroaches are probably going to survive the longest, but we don't really eat cockroaches.
Okay, so let me add the qualifier of high-order animals. So, for instance, I think we would agree that gorillas are a higher-order animal or more intelligent animal than chickens.
Absolutely.
Agreed? Yeah. But a lot of gorillas are endangered. Actually, I think gorillas in general are an endangered species.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Chickens are not.
The exact opposite.
Exactly. And the reason for that is the fact that we cultivate them.
Yeah.
We specifically house them, protect them, breed them, figure out ways of making them healthier. We have immunizations against diseases. We, as humans, protect our food a lot. It's for the purpose of eating them, but we continue to propagate the species that end up being good for us to eat.
Well, yes, there's also a point to be made of that's cultivation of them can change the species entirely, and it is through just chance or through artificial selection. we create new species that best feed us.
For instance, with chickens, there are breeds of chickens that can come to maturity in a matter of a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And if you keep feeding them, they will just keep on growing and growing and growing to the point where they almost literally explode. And it's for the purpose of just growing meat.
Yeah, or chickens that can lay eggs on a very regular schedule, and all that's their entire purpose is to lay a few eggs a day, maybe, and go from there.
I think it's on the order of an egg a day, but it's still a lot.
Yeah.
And it's more than they would naturally do.
Oh, yeah, far more.
But those animals are much better protected and more likely to continue surviving than their wild counterparts. If you're an egg-laying chicken, you're going to be protected from the elements. You're going to be indoors. You're going to be very well fed. So your basic needs of shelter, food, and we're going to want them to reproduce because we want more of them. So reproduction is covered.
And all they have to do is shit out a few eggs every day.
Not a bad life.
No. But what happens when they stop being able to lay eggs?
We eat them.
Is that fair?
That's a good question. Does it have to be fair? So, again, the animals are providing us with a benefit, and we provide animals with a benefit.
There's a trade there.
And they don't have the capability to consent to that trade.
Correct.
Almost all don't. Free-range animals kind of do, but there's still a large fence around where they are.
Free-range animals have a right to make many decisions on what they do, from where they're going to peck at the ground or what grass they're going to eat or who they're going to play with that day if they're animals that play with each other. But ultimately, they don't have a choice on when they get eaten. They don't get a choice on when they die.
True. They lose the ability to choose when they die. However, for a lot of animals that are raised, they still have a lot of choices. Pastures are frequently open. Animals can come and go as they please. I know with a lot of dairy farms, more modern dairy farms, the cows actually choose when they get milked. They also
have nice brushes and everything. They try to give them a really good life.
They have automatic cow washes, and if you don't believe me, it's an actual thing. The cows just walk up. Oh, there's this spinning brush. Oh my God, I can itch all over my back that I wouldn't normally be able to reach. There are many farms where animals live in absolute luxury relative to living out in the wild. And also for the automatic milking example, cows, when they're producing milk, it can become painful if that milk is not drained. And they know when milk needs to come out, which is why automatic milking is great, to be able to just come in, machine hooks it up, takes out the milk, detects when the udder is running out, and cow walks off. It's completely voluntary. That is something that they actively choose to do.
That is something that they actively choose to do, but it was through our breeding that they got to the point where it would become painful if they aren't milked.
No,
No,
that's not true. I believe mammals in general, including just humans, as the breasts begin to swell, they can become very sore.
Well, yes, I guess that's valid. I'm thinking like that's true to an extent, and I'm under the impression, and I guess I don't have the scientific papers or anything to back this up, but I would assume that we have selectively bred dairy cows to produce the most milk possible, to the point now where it becomes very painful.
Dairy cows are unrecognizable from the wild bulls that they came from.
And so we did breed for that feature, that they would produce a lot of milk regardless of how much pain it is. Nowadays, they have the choice on when they get milked, therefore they can alleviate their own pain. But
and that's part of the give and take of, it is our job as we are cultivating animals for food to make sure that we try to keep them comfortable and protected. That I think that's a trade-off, and we are actively consenting to that trade-off, even if the animals can't.
Yeah. I think a lot of animals are unable to provide consent in a meaningful way that we would kind of deem it.
So
I think that's fair. And there are also a lot of these animals, like if you were to take a dairy cow and leave it out in the forest, how long is it really going to survive it anymore?
It's not really
I mean, it'll be able to feed on the grass
until
but-
winter.
And yeah, until winter, in which case it'll die, or if there's a predator, that it'll get eaten.
Mhm.
So I think that animals can, to some extent, consent. Even feed animals. How often do you see cows trying to escape their pastures? Like, oh, there's a fence there.
Yeah.
If it really wanted to, it could just run at the fence, go through, and leave.
Oh, yeah. With a lot of the fences that you see out there, it would be easy.
Yeah, but they're trained from a young age that not even try.
Okay.
And they don't have the realization. But
But the reason I bring it up is there are animals that if you mistreat them, they'll try to get away.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why a lot of dogs are going to be chained up, or a lot of violent dogs that are trained improperly are chained up because they'll just go haywire and go everywhere. So I think that if an animal is being mistreated, it can recognize like, hey, I'm in pain, I'm uncomfortable, I want something else. And it can try to get away. The fact that we, generally speaking, don't have to try hard to keep we have fences to keep animals from wandering away. We don't have cages for food animals in the okay.
We don't have cages.
Some of them are.
Yeah, we do definitely have cages, but if you were focusing, it sounds like we're talking a lot about free range here, and in that case, we have fences to keep them from wandering away, but they're not
and
caged.
not keep them from escaping. I think that there's a difference between wandering and escaping.
Yeah, there is.
And I don't know if you've ever seen a crazed horse that has gone off its rocker. Rocking horse. Like, they can plow through fences, and they have done so. But it's usually not to escape unless they're running away from something.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the fact that we are treating them well enough that they don't have a reason to actively try and escape, particularly with the more intelligent ones like horses, cows, etc., I think argues or is an argument to say that animals can consent to the deal that is being made.
So I guess a follow-up question. Is not being So my question is really, is not being eaten a right that we want to recognize? Do humans have a right not to be eaten?
Let's make it broader. Do animals in general that are not at the top of the food chain and have natural predators, do they have a right not to be eaten?
So it really should be, is not being eaten a right? And I phrased it as, do humans have a right not to be eaten? Because I like to establish bounds, because no matter what, there will be a spectrum here. But if we take a look at the bounds and get an understanding of those, then we can start to dig into what's between the two endpoints.
So as a human, I feel like I do have a right not to be eaten. And if you want to eat me, I have to give you consent.
So do you consent to me eating you out?
No.
Different kind of eating.
Right. But still no.
Okay. So I can't eat you or eat you.
Exactly.
Okay. What if you did consent to me eating you?
Well, if I consented to you eating me, that would presume that you are going to eat me.
Should that be permitted? If you really, really don't like your right arm, you just hate it, it's causing you a lot of pain, and you're sick of it, and you just want to chop it off, and I'm like, hey, that's a nice looking arm, I'd like to eat it.
I mean, it is, I guess, legally fine.
It is not legally fine.
At least in some way, shape, or form, it is. I think it was about a year or two ago. There was a guy that got into a really bad motorcycle accident, and in the process needed to have his leg amputated. And so he asked the doctors for his leg, and he got all of his friends that were willing to do this, and they took all the meat off of the leg, and they cooked it, and they made tacos, and then they all ate human tacos.
I would absolutely try that if one of my friends wanted to do that.
Well, if one of your friends had their leg amputated. Or
which
maybe-
would be really unfortunate, or myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is why you don't ride motorcycles, kids.
So you might eat your own leg. So should active consent to being eaten be okay?
Yeah.
And I realize there should probably be an entire episode on cannibalism.
Yeah.
Which
Oh,
we
yeah.
can bring
I
this
think
back
we
up
can do
to.
that.
So,
I will say being eaten, but the right to be killed to be eaten. So chopping, like having a limb lost where it was not.
and not in the form of suicide.
Yeah. And so
Mhm.
that's also a separate question about assisted suicide and whether or not that should be allowed. But should I, like it without saying, yes, you can kill me to eat me, I give you consent to eat me, therefore kill me. That is a different question than I give you consent to eat my arm that I just had amputated.
Sure.
Right.
And in general, we do not eat parts of animals while the rest of them is still alive. We'll, with eggs and milk, we have components that are produced by animals, but we're not eating a chicken wing and leaving the rest of the chicken to grow.
I mean, we do that with buffalo. Like buffalo wings, last time you saw a buffalo fly.
Well, no, it's a vestigial organ.
So it's all right to eat a vestigial organ. So
Your appendix, you could eat your appendix, although if
mean,
you need to have it removed, it's probably filled with poison.
there was a recent study that showed that the appendix is actually doing a use.
Yeah.
Sure. That's a different conversation, though. So, all right. Eating animals as a whole, and let's leave ourselves out of the question for now. Let's bring up the lion and the antelope. Cats, felines in general, are obligate carnivores, meaning they cannot process plants. In order to survive, they have to have meat. Which, by the way, if you know of anyone that is trying to get a pet cat to go to a strictly vegan diet, they're killing their cat. And you should tell some sort of animal control services about that because they're killing their cat slowly. They're starving them to death. They need to have meat. So how do we deal with that? Does a cat have the right to live? I would argue yes,
I would too.
which means it has to eat something else.
Correct.
So I think in general, if all things have the right to live, it kind of contrarily says that some animals must be eaten. That
Correct.
makes the assumption that all animals have the right to live.
Mm-hmm.
Should we say obligate carnivores do not have the right to live because we have gotten to the point where we say nope, maintaining life, specifically intelligent life, is important. Obligate carnivores get in the way of that. Therefore, obligate carnivores should be exterminated.
I'd be worried about the effects on the rest of the environment if we did that.
Mm-hmm.
Because removing a part of the food chain, who knows what's going to happen? The whole ecosystem could collapse.
And that does happen. If you take carnivores or predators and remove them completely from an ecosystem, there is an explosion of other animals. So, for instance, I'm trying to think of a specific example. Deer. That's a good example. If you remove the predators that will hunt deer, including humans, just humans hunt deer, if you enact laws that prevent people from hunting deer, the deer population can just skyrocket, particularly if there are no natural predators, in which case they will start eating a lot more of the vegetation, which can seriously affect the other forms of wildlife there because there's less vegetation to eat. Also, in general, in places that hunting is prohibited, there are a lot more accidents where people hit deer with their cars.
Yeah, and if you let the deer population get too out of control, then they start starving because there's too many of them and not enough food for them.
Right. So it will find a new balance point, but they'll probably end up overpopulating, overeating the food source, and then recoiling back down and having an underpopulation. And if that recoil is bad enough, it's possible to go too far down and not be able to rebuild the population. So completely eliminating carnivores in general or predators in general has the risk of killing off the prey that they eat because of overpopulation and the backswing because of it.
Yeah.
So that's a danger. It's a danger we want to avoid. So is our job as arbiters of the food chain to maintain stability?
Yeah, I think that is key. I mean, we haven't always done a great job of it in many regards. And in terms of just the food chain, we have accidentally kind of broken it in many places at times. We deem a certain animal a pest, and they're killed off, and then it causes all the things. I mean, we can go full Mao Zedong here and kill all the pigeons.
Tell us about it.
I mean, Mao, not a great guy. Definitely one of the worst, in fact. He deemed pigeons to be dirty, and he said, just kill them all. And I believe he actually gave monetary rewards for people just killing pigeons. And what ended up happening is the pigeons were feasting on all these bugs that would...
Locusts.
They're locusts that would normally be kept under control by the pigeons. Once the pigeons were gone, the locusts went crazy with their overpopulation, started eating all of the grains and crops that were meant for people, and then there was mass starvation in China. All because Mao didn't like...
How long did that last?
I don't know the exact length.
Okay, so we paused, looked it up for a little bit of extra information, but we're back. It looks like over the course of 2 years, this ecological downturn caused between 15 and 45 million people to starve to death in the Great Chinese Famine. So it's a really, really bad idea. Even just, birds are a pest. Mm-hmm. Let's eliminate them. You can end up killing yourself because of that.
And I mean,
which, by the way, I think that's fair. Mm-hmm. Like, if we are not being good arbiters of the system, then our payback is, well, the system is collapsing. You won't have food. You're gonna die.
Yep.
And
arguably, we have put ourselves in some of the situations that we're using as examples earlier on. The reason that the deer population can become overpopulated if we don't hunt them is that we've wiped out most of the predators that would go after them. Like, wolves are...
Which is why, interestingly, since we wiped out their predators, wolves have been driving them out because of civilization. Okay, it is our duty to maintain the balance of the ecosystem.
Yeah, we have to become the predators now.
We broke a chain. We have to fill its place if we want the system to survive.
So what we're saying is that arguably in the deer case, hunting deer and preventing them from overpopulating is a moral obligation.
Yeah. And I mean, there are laws put in place that are limiting how much you can hunt, but that changes based on the year and what the population is, and then also the age of the deer that you can hunt.
For instance, and I think there are differences in whether or not you can hunt bucks or doe.
Yep.
There's limitations on how many.
Yep.
And I believe the Department of Natural Resources in the United States, at least, does a survey trying to find out what the deer population is at the current year. They determine here's how many deer should be killed to maintain the ecological balance, and then that's what determines how many people can go hunting and how many permits you can get to go hunt deer. So it's heavily managed to make sure that we don't disturb that balance.
Yep, it is. There's a very careful balance there, and we've done a pretty good job of balancing it, at least in the last few decades.
We've been getting better. Let's say that.
Yeah.
We've definitely gotten better at it. And
so it sounds like we agree in that case that hunting, not for sport, but for the purpose of maintaining an ecosystem, is necessary and a moral good, because it prevents deer from overpopulating and having the backswing of starvation.
Right. By hunting them, we are probably making them survive better as a species.
And I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
What about trophy hunting?
I think that's where it gets tricky.
If we are killing something for purely the reason of killing something, I don't think that falls under the same umbrella that we've been using everywhere else. So far, we've talked about killing animals or using them to produce food. There's a legitimate reason there that we need food, and I mean, animals are a good source of food. I won't say that they're the best because no matter what, there's a chain there.
They're the most particularly in regards to protein. And actually, let's come back to trophy hunting.
Yeah.
Let's go back to food a little bit because I don't think that we talked about everything in there, because one of the benefits of animals is the very high density of protein. You can get protein from vegetables, but it is incredibly hard.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And caloric density, protein density is, I mean, the main reason that we feed on animals.
It's valuable to us.
Yeah.
And as long as we have the number of animals necessary to maintain that, which is why we need to cultivate in order to make sure that we don't eat to death all of the animals around us. So particularly like chickens, if we just only fed on chickens, the chicken population would die. But if we cultivate them and manage how much we're eating, we can make sure that we're not wiping out the population. So I think as long as we're doing that and not wiping out the population, and in fact maintaining the population, we're doing our jobs as the arbiters, and we're able to feed and get the benefits from animals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so anything else that we want to talk about with regards specifically to eating animals?
I
think
we can have a
it
discussion.
doesn't quite go without saying, but I think the type of death is important. That we should not be drawing out death into some long ritual. It should be as quick as possible. Slitting the throat.
Don't let him suffer.
Slitting the throat, bullet to the head, something fast.
Yeah. And the other point is if we are managing a population of animals for them to be eaten, the conditions in which they are alive should matter too. This is the free range argument where while chickens are being grown for food, they should have at least some ability and some comfort there.
I don't know if happiness, I don't know if chickens can be happy. But I think
they can definitely feel pain.
Right, they can feel pain. So I think in general, it's pretty easy to agree that avoidance of pain is good. So,
unless you're into that.
Right. But that requires consent.
Fair.
So without consent, avoidance of pain and avoidance of discomfort should be at least attempted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that for hundreds of years, at least hundreds of years, we've tried to do that. Barns are a great example of that. Like, we make stables, yes, for making sure that the animals don't escape, but it's also, hey, it's snowing and windy out. You do not want to be outside. I'm going to keep you inside. So pain is a sign that the animal's not doing well. If the animal's not doing well, it's going to die off. So we have a vested interest in keeping animals not in pain, because then they will become tastier. They're more likely to continue surviving. So I think that, yes, it should be regulated to an extent, but there's also a benefit to just keeping animals in good condition, which is that they're more likely to survive and they're going to produce more food.
Yeah. I mean, per animal, producing more food is true of free range to caged, but per, I guess, in a lot of cases, energy input, where you can fit 1,000 chickens into a barn if you cage them all
Stressed
up.
animals also don't eat as regularly.
Yeah, but they, as a whole, you could produce more meat. And that's why factory farming is a thing. It's efficient.
Sure.
And so there is whether or not it's the most efficient way, there's a moral obligation that animals that we are either cultivating or we are responsible for should be comfortable and shouldn't be in pain.
And I think, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with it too.
So I think condition of living will come in later when we talk about just keeping animals in general, not necessarily just for food. But for right now, we okay with going back to trophy hunting?
Yeah.
Is there anything wrong with trophy hunting?
Yeah.
What?
When you go trophy hunting, you aren't hunting because of a need. You are hunting purely because you aren't, I guess, I'm trying to think of the best way to word it.
You want something pretty to show off.
Yeah.
You want to prove something. So for instance, to other people, to show off. You want to say, hey, look at this cool thing I did.
Killing for social standing is not right. And even if you go trophy hunting and then you say, oh, well, I'm going to also eat it, and that's still not right because it isn't one of, like...
No, hold on. Let's take the example of deer hunting.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that is a goal in deer hunting is I want to get a deer with as particularly bucks with as many points on the antlers as possible. That's a form of trophy hunting.
To an extent, that's true, but I think a distinction between killing a white rhinoceros and for just to say that you have and have a picture of it versus killing a buck that has a wonderful rack.
How endangered they are has a difference.
How endangered they are, and our role in cultivating them. Like we have put ourselves in a position of being responsible for the deer population, and if we don't do anything, then they are going to overpopulate themselves.
And in the case of rhinos, we are already at the point where our effects on their lifestyles or their existence has had a negative effect.
Greatly. There are, like, the northern white rhino, I believe, just went extinct or functionally extinct. And the other thing to think about is the reproduction period. When you get those very large animals, whether it be rhinos, elephants,
it takes a long time for them to reproduce.
lions.
Same thing with and same thing with humans. The not gestation period, but the period until a child can live on its own
and reproduce.
Yeah.
And you look at deer, and you have
it's a year.
You have a year before they can start to reproduce, but ideally you wait a little bit longer than that.
Sure.
And that's why there are rules about killing bucks only at certain times, because they
need to be able to reproduce.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so there is a distinction there about what is it going to mean for the survival of the species. Now, I've never heard of someone killing a deer purely for the trophy aspect. It's always food and an added trophy.
Sure. But you were saying in the case of other animals that killing it for the sake of a trophy and also eating it, well, that
there's a distinction there about population-wise, protecting them. When it comes to generic trophy hunting, for the most part, the things that are hunted for trophy are very rare, often endangered.
Things that are things like lions.
Right.
Yeah.
To be fair, though, sometimes, at least with some of those African animals, there is a park. I forgot exactly where in Africa, but they actually sell off the hunting permits so that they can help control the population.
And that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up, particularly with trophy hunting. For instance, lions. People will pay a lot of money to be able to hunt a lion. And it's kind of silly if it's like, okay, I'm going to hunt a really dangerous creature from really far away with a rifle that it can't see me, so I'm not really in danger. So, but hey, if people get a thrill out of it and are able to put a lion skin on their wall, okay, they have to pay a ridiculous amount of money to be able to do that. And
most of that money goes back into conservation.
I think all of that money goes into creating conservations, a lot of time for the animal that they're killing.
So the thing about this, though, is you are using an example of a park whose job it is kind of to provide this so that they can protect them. Now,
and our point is that they get the money to be able to protect the animal by allowing a couple of them to be killed.
Correct.
And if our job is to protect and preserve the food chain or the members of the food chain, including the ones at the top, through whatever means possible, killing one for the sake of the many is arguably valuable.
In examples like that, where the end goal of kind of doing that hunting does cause these species to be conserved better, that has an argument in favor. But there are a lot of illegal operations where they will, poachers will lead.
Poaching and unrestricted killing is a different kind of trophy hunting. So I guess there would be two types of trophy hunting. One is the illegal kind, where you have poachers that are killing all of the animals that they can. The other kind is legally regulated trophy hunting, where
And
you do actually have monetary benefit that is used to protect the animals that you're killing.
Yeah, and in those legally regulated senses, I believe they use animals that are past their reproductive periods, where they no longer can produce young. Therefore, there's not that much loss. There's still a loss of.
There's a loss of the
species.
Yeah.
Right, but if they can't produce anymore, or if they're getting older and have reproduced, it's like, great, they have contributed to the propagation of the species, and you're deemed an acceptable loss if it's for the sake of the greater good of the species.
Yeah.
So that kind of trophy hunting, it sounds like, conceptually, can be a moral good.
Yes. There is an argument for it, and it can result in the betterment of that species, but it may not always, and it does need to be very closely regulated. I don't know all the specifics of these parks, and they may claim that this happens, but you know what? It is one of those things that they can also just make a lot of money.
Not individuals should not be the only ones responsible for it. We should have groups and regulation that should keep an eye on it to make sure that it's not overdone, which is the same thing as what we do for deer hunting. It's not one person saying, I think that 500 deer need to die this year. It's a whole bunch of people. It's a whole bunch of people
with
doing research,
facts and science behind that,
as much as is reasonably possible.
And there have, as you said, we have gotten a lot better about controlling the population in the past few decades, and that is, we've been learning, and we've been taking data from previous years and adapting it, and taking a look at all of the different factors there. And so we have come up with these algorithms, and then also use observation to make a determination on how many should be hunted. I am much more familiar with the deer hunting system
than with a lion hunting system.
So I would love to believe that exact same science and everything goes into
and
all
that it's
of their
being done
things,
at least remotely responsibly.
Yeah, I'm just not as familiar with it. So
sure,
I'm not going to. I'm going to say that there is an argument to be had if it's done right.
There's the potential for it being a moral good. If done properly, it can also be abused, but anything can be abused. Hunting can be abused in general. It's like, okay, there's a bunch of extras. All right, you can kill off a bunch of deer. That can be abused just as much.
And it does. Like, people sign up babies to go deer hunting.
Yeah. Which, now, that can be compensated for, and we can say, all right, well, we assume that. But even if you can sign up babies to go deer hunting and say you can then claim it, there's a certain number of permits that they'll give out.
Right. You're limited to the number of permits, limited to the number of deer tags.
Right. So the important thing isn't necessarily how many families are doing it. That's an entertainment thing of, all right, does everyone that wants to go hunting have the capability of going hunting, or are they permitted to by the government? Is the population kept at a healthy number? I think that's the important thing. Yeah, there's some question.
There's some weirdness, but generally, yeah, I agree
of people abusing the system. But I think as long as the numbers are there to justify it, it's not that big of a problem. All right, I think at this point we can probably transition to a different topic. Kind of. It's similar lines, but it's the other half of this ideology, which is keeping animals as pets. And I think this has a lot of moral questions to it. So can we move on to that?
Yep.
Do we have the rights, or do we have the right to keep animals as pets in general?
I'd say so. In the grand scheme of things, it tends to be a good relationship for both you and the animal. The animal gets a nice place to live. They're taken care of. They don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from.
And they're frequently treated as a member of the family.
Yeah.
Particularly, you look at how dogs are treated. It's like, yep, if we're going somewhere, you go somewhere, and we want to make sure that you are happy.
A lot of people treat their pets like kids. You can get a cute little dog stroller for them if you wanted. Or cat packs.
Cat packs?
Yeah,
like backpacks with the little bubble that the cat can look out of?
Exactly. You gotta be able to bring your pets everywhere nowadays.
Well, and make sure that they can do it in comfort.
Right, because that's a big deal.
Sure. So what is the definition of a pet? Does it have to explicitly be something that is not eaten? Because 100 years ago, you could keep a chicken as a pet, and then you could just eat it. Actually, even in modern times,
today,
like I've known people that keep a chicken, and it's like, all right, we're gonna eventually eat you, but we kind of like your quirky personality in the meantime.
right. I think maybe not eating this animal as a reason for its existence. Like, I don't really think about eating a dog. Granted, I'm in the United States where we don't typically eat dogs. But even with a chicken, if I was explicitly buying a pet, I would not really think about eating the chicken. I would probably have problems eating the chicken, honestly, if I was treating it as a pet.
That's another thing I've seen is particularly with people that have pet chickens. It's like, all right, I really like you as a chicken to the point where I'm not going to eat you.
Exactly.
I mean,
what a blessing.
We have a special guest here that might be able to really give an insider's view.
Yeah, we have a cat at our feet. So, pets, I think in general, are an animal that is domesticated, that we keep, take care of, provide for.
It doesn't necessarily have to be domesticated.
Can you have a wild pet?
I mean, you can have a wolf as a pet if you have the proper permits. You could have a snake. So, you can't really domesticate snakes.
Yeah, and there's a difference between, I guess, I will use the term house training and domesticating.
Okay.
Domesticating applies to a species.
So domestication, I think it's specific to the species because you can have a fish. Mm-hmm. A goldfish does not get domesticated.
Correct.
Right.
You've essentially trapped it in a pool of water and it's just there.
Right.
But when you think about like a cat or a dog, the domestication actually has an effect on their DNA, and they're in the process of domestication, they become kind of the animal that we want them to be. Whereas you look at a squirrel, you can take a baby squirrel and put it in a litter of cats, and if the mom accepts it, it will be raised as a cat. It will act as a cat. Mm-hmm. It will meow like a cat.
Squirrels meowing is adorable.
And so you're effectively house training a squirrel or making it think it's a cat, but are squirrels domesticated? No.
But they can be trained to reflect the values of the owner of the pet.
There is the definition of domestication, I believe, involves an actual change to DNA and a hereditary behavior that gets passed down. Whereas you can train a single animal to do a certain thing, but that does not get passed down until that animal's been domesticated.
You're saying that domestication is the transference of temperament, genetic temperament, beyond across generations, not an individual animal being able to agree with the rules of, oh, okay, I shouldn't go through that door.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, because realistically, if we were going to have pet squirrels, we would go out there, find the friendliest squirrels.
And some people do have pet squirrels.
Oh, yeah, my parents did for a while.
So if you get them when they're babies and can train them, they can be trained. So training is different than domestication.
Right.
Yep.
So do we have the right to do that? Can you, if you think about this from a human perspective, if an animal stole a baby out of a crib and said, all right, this is my pet now, I'm going to train it to love me, I think we would be really, really pissed off about that. And yet we'll take baby kittens from the mother as soon as they're weaned. It's like, all right, you don't need the mother's milk anymore. We're going to take you and you're going to be our pet. If that happened to a human child, to like another species doing that, we would be livid. So why is it okay? Or is it okay?
I mean, that mother cat would definitely be angry about you taking their kittens, because that's essentially their family. But in the grand scheme of things, is that kitten going to be having a better life with that new family?
So the quality of life has something to do with it.
So let's say a small human child was kidnapped by a race of aliens and raised to be a space pirate.
Let's make it more realistic. Let's say there's a poor family that is frequently hungry, not in very good living conditions, and a rich family decides to kidnap the child and treat it like their own.
There's a difference between, I guess, forced adoption and raising something as a pet.
Forced adoption. That's a horrifying term.
But there is a distinction there.
Sure.
And I think when we are talking about pets, we are talking about animals that don't have the same mental faculties that the owners or the families of such pets do. Like,
So I can forcibly adopt a child that is a child of someone who's mentally retarded.
no.
That's
'Cause
basically what you were saying
child-
before.
So there is a key.
If the parents are mentally retarded.
I'm not saying that. There is a distinction to be made between mental retardation, and that does not make someone an animal.
No, I understand, but you're making the argument that they are moving from a house kept by less intelligent individuals or less intelligent creatures to more intelligent creatures.
I am saying that when we are talking about this, we are talking about pets and not forced adoption.
I
There's a key
understand,
difference here.
but I'm saying that the reason that I'm bringing this up is what differentiates, again, with the idea that dogs are frequently viewed as a member of the family. Same thing with cats. We mourn them similarly to how we would mourn a child. So if we're talking about forcibly taking a baby from a mother, what are the qualities that permit us to do that with animals and not with people? If not for the sake of the food chain, what permits that? And if it's intelligence, why does intelligence not play a factor with the parents of humans? Because I think there's a case to be made that a lot of parents should not be parents because they are dumb as a rock, stupid. But generally speaking, except for when they're actively endangering the child, we don't take them away. But if they are endangering the child, we do take them away and put them into, or at least try to put them into a better home. So to an extent, we do act in similar ways, that if the child is being endangered because of the neglect or malevolence of the... And I say malevolence because there's an intention there to bring harm or discomfort or pain on the child. So, but even regardless of intent, if the child is being harmed or hurt, if it's to a certain degree, we'll take that child away from the parent. And we view similarly wild animals. It's like, look, this kid, the reason that cats have so many cats in a litter is because most of them are going to die. In nature, most of them are not going to survive, whether that be being eaten by another predator or just not finding enough food and starving to death. That's why animals tend to have a large number of children in a single birth. So taking some of those animals away and taking some of those children away increases their chance of survival. So is it just a degree to which we increase the chance of survival is what permits us to be able to take young away from a mother, regardless of species, including humans? Should that be the determining factor? Just a certain level of increase in quality of life.
I feel like that would be terrible in humans.
We do it though.
Right, we do it to a point.
We take kids away from abusive parents or neglectful parents. Child neglect is a thing. Even if it's not intentional, it's like, look, you can't take care of this child. We're going to move them, generally speaking, to another family member. If there is another family member that has their life together and can take care of the child, that's generally where they're moved to, or a closest relative that can be found, or adopted. But we do it as humans.
Right. It's definitely different with, say, a cat, because typically the cat is not abusing her kittens.
True. But the reason, abuse is an example of quality of life.
Right. At least if we're thinking about the cat, very well could be there's not enough food for all those kittens in that house.
And there likely wouldn't be, because cats need a lot of food. And like we mentioned earlier, they're obligate carnivores, which means you have to have a lot of meat.
Exactly. If I have a cat, it has 6 kittens. I'm not going to be keeping 7 cats around.
And that's fair. So is our ability to keep an animal in general as a pet, should it just be related to our ability to increase the quality of life of that animal?
I think that seems reasonable. The vast majority of the time you are increasing the quality of life of that animal.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not, we're calling the
we take the pets away.
Right.
which I think we seem to have come to an agreement as a species that, hey, if you're mistreating your pets to a certain degree, we're going to take it away because you're not fulfilling your implicit obligation, even if we haven't explicitly stated what that obligation is, which is what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
So what is that implicit obligation? Is it just to provide a better life, a more comfortable life? Is it to prolong life in general? So, for instance, birds living in cages is not a life improvement.
Oh, no. Yep, I had bird growing up. It did not like being in that cage.
And even when it's in the room, it's like it can't really fly around very much.
Well, and often with the larger birds, you clip their wings, too, so they're not going to fly.
Right. In which case, you are taking away their ability to do a primary functionality. It's like, okay, that's how it gets around. So it would be like you no longer being able to walk.
Or in the case of cats, declawing cats. You're literally cutting off the last digit of all their fingers when you declaw a cat. And you are taking away their ability to do a lot of things that they are supposed to be able to do.
They use it just for being able to get a running start, being able to grip the ground, because otherwise they'll
climbing things,
be sliding, climbing. So,
in those cases, it's definitely not an increase in the quality of life for them to be a pet.
So let's stick with birds, because frequently people that have birds as pets keep them in cages.
Yep.
Or even if they don't keep them in a cage, it's like, all right, you're in a room, but you're stuck in this room or in this house. And generally birds...
They like space.
Yes. Now, to be fair, so do dogs. I know wolves have very, very large territories. But you can also take a dog out into your yard and let him run around. So you or take him to a dog park or something along those lines, or take him for a walk. So birds, you generally don't take them for a fly because they'll probably just leave.
Yeah.
Now, what about falcons? Because it sounds to me like keeping parakeets and other birds like that as pets in cages, based on our definition of improving the quality of life, does not meet that definition, meaning that it would be immoral to keep birds for show like that.
Yeah.
Particularly if you have to clip their wings to be able to reasonably handle them, you're doing something wrong. You're changing...
Yeah, it's not great, especially when you get into the larger birds.
Right. So I would argue that that is different in relation to falconry. Because falcons, you're keeping the falcon, and a lot of times you're putting a hood over its head to keep it calm and make sure that it's not flying away. But part of what the attraction of falconry is to be able to hunt with the falcon. Take it out into the forest or somewhere and find an animal and get the falcon to catch it, bring it back to you, and then you basically have the animal that it caught. You also give the falcon some food. So it gets food out of it. It has consistent food. You provide it housing, but you also allow it to go out, fly, be free, and do one of its core functions, which is to hunt. That's one of its core drives.
So that is certainly better than keeping a parakeet. You know, in that case, the falcon gets to fly around. They get to be outside and have quite a wide range, because I would expect you to let them go pretty far.
Mm-hmm.
So they should have decent recall if they're out there hunting for you.
Sure, and they're trained to come back, but they come back voluntarily. If they really, really wanted to, it's like, you're not on a tether. You could just leave.
Right, and that I am much more okay with. In that case, they do actually have the option to leave, which not a lot of pets do.
The option, yeah, and it's unique, I think, to falconry, to an extent, because like they can get away very fast. Now they'll still have a tag on their legs, so they might be able to be
Someone
identified.
might return them, but
And same thing with dogs having a collar, but a falcon is given much more leeway than a dog, for instance. You might take him to a dog park, or very well-trained dogs you might take to a beach or somewhere where there aren't limitations because they're well-trained enough to come back. But that's also because they want to come back.
Yep.
And there's usually a reason for that. Generally, it's because there's security in food. That, I think, is most frequently what you see in animals that do actually like their owners, is the fact that they have food security and shelter security, which is why falcons probably come back. It's like, look, I hunt, but I don't have to hunt to get my food. So if you are never at a point where the pet or the animal that you're keeping has the ability to choose whether or not it wants to stay with you, does that have a negative effect on your right to keep the animal as a pet? So, and again, to bring up what we were talking about earlier with cows. Cows are held in pastures. They could technically get out if they really wanted to plow through that fence. And that's a choice that they, okay, I have a good enough life here. I'm not going to try to escape. Birds, like that you clip their wings to prevent them from escaping and put them in a cage to prevent them from escaping. It seems to me like that would be significantly more immoral than raising cows, even if you're just raising them for food.
I mean, yeah, I would certainly agree with that, because those cows are going to be happier in a lot of ways than that bird that has its wings clipped, you know, because they are going to be very secure and they're going to feel comfortable. I feel like that bird with its wings clipped is not going to be comfortable in that cage, even though it has everything it needs to live, because it doesn't really have much free will anymore.
Right, and that's kind of what we were hinting at before, of needs being met is not enough. You need to also have comfort in mind.
And an ability to kind of make your own decisions.
Right.
And when you are a bird locked in a cage, you really can't do anything. Like, you have a very small area. You can go choose when you eat based on when there's food available.
And I think birds that have the capability of flight, removing their ability to fly is a serious decrease in quality of life. Chickens don't have chickens can fly for very short distances, but
I mean, they've been bred not to be able to fly. So
Yeah.
is there a distinction there between us breeding an animal such that it can't fly so that it can't escape?
Absolutely.
Right.
And I would argue that some forms of breeding are animal abuse.
Oh, definitely.
I can definitely agree
So,
with that.
Pugs.
Yes. I wanted to bring up pugs. I think that people who breed pugs arguably should be strangled, because that's what they do to their pugs.
Mm-hmm.
For those that aren't familiar, pugs have that really squished face, and they're the dog that is constantly breathing. And for those of you that aren't aware why, it's because the soft palate of their mouth is moved in a way that it basically pinches off their airflow. It would be like every moment of your life choking on your tongue.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And I've known a couple of people that have pugs as pets, and they frequently have major medical problems and just issues because they can't breathe.
Yep.
And it's something that has been done intentionally. It's, for some reason, the squished face that is more flat and has a shorter snout is viewed as more aesthetically pleasing, and people have been selectively breeding them for many generations to create an animal that has a flat face. And the result of that is an animal that can't breathe.
Yeah. And yeah, to be fair, I completely agree that pugs should stop being bred. That said, existing pugs should not be put down for any reason.
And by the way,
unless there's,
I don't
guess,
actually think that people that breed pugs should be strangled, but
they do deserve punishment, and they should stop immediately breeding pugs.
yes, I think that even if there aren't legal repercussions or actions that we would take against people that breed pugs, I think there should be a stigma and moral reprehensibility to people that do that. That you are doing it just for self-benefit, not for benefit of the animal. And now, for instance, chickens, breeding them to have a lot more meat. You're not benefiting the animal, really. They're going to be bigger, but you're doing it for the benefit of eating. Putting an animal, but
It doesn't really affect the chicken in the same way.
being meatier doesn't make put the chicken in pain. Suffocating on your own tongue does.
Right.
And that's why I think that pugs, or the breeding of pugs, is morally reprehensible. How many viewers do you think we just lost? Goodbye.
Wait, we have viewers?
Right? Can you not see sound? It's great.
Can you hear color?
All the time. So breeding can have very bad results. But arguably, just in dogs in general, they are bred from wolf-like ancestors and have been domesticated, which supposedly, at least to our best estimates, the way that humans and dogs were domesticated, and the reason I say both is I think that both humans and dogs were, in a way, domesticated. Dogs being faster, I believe, in sprint speed makes them better for catching very, very fast prey. But humans have other capabilities, particularly with tracking down and doing long-distance hunting. The fact that we are upright walkers means that if you see a deer, you can just keep on chasing after it. Eventually, the deer will pass out from exhaustion, and you'll be able to catch up to it. There is a particular marathon that's really interesting if you want to watch it, horses versus humans, because horses are known for being ridiculously fast runners, but they're not as good at long distance as they are at short distance. And I think every year there's a marathon that's run between humans and horses, and it swaps back and forth between who wins. So humans are good at long distance. Mm-hmm. Dogs are good at short distance. And for different things. Humans also have tools to bring down larger animals, and dogs can bring down larger animals in packs. So there's benefits to teaming up and having both humans and dogs as a team. And I think that at least the idea goes that the domestication of the dog was also the domestication of the human, because dogs could gain consistency from the intelligence of the human of making sure, all right, let's plan ahead, let's have meat, let's have the resources here. And dogs benefited from that planning. We benefited from the speed of dogs and their ability to hunt. And so it was kind of a natural connection. So it was not a domestication of dogs per se, but we domesticated each other for a mutual benefit.
I'm not sure about the term domestication there, because that does imply, as I said earlier, the DNA change.
It implies a intentional change.
Mm-hmm. And so that definitely happened with dogs, and in a way they trained us while we domesticated them. But people, did human DNA change?
Yes, in the sense that if humans that worked with dogs were more successful at hunting and surviving back when, people take food reliability for granted. Nowadays, it's like, for most of human history, it's been a struggle every day to make sure that you have enough food. That was the primary focus of your existence, was to find food for yourself. So thousands of years ago, humans working together with dogs, you would have a huge advantage over other people in terms of finding and maintaining a food source if you had dogs. And so that would change our genetic makeup to be people who are crazy enough to work with a wolf, and wolves that are docile enough to work with a human and not eat him. So I think that there were genetic changes on both, which is why I say that domestication was both of the wolf and of the human.
I can definitely see that.
Yeah. I'm not going to say that there weren't DNA changes. I'm just not confident. I'm not 100% that there
they
were.
weren't necessarily as
dogs.
guided.
Yeah.
But they still happened.
Well, has there ever been a study of humans that have been separated and never domesticated dogs, and whether or not they have the same attraction towards dogs as those whose ancestors trained and kind of...
Sounds like we have an idea for a research study.
Yeah.
Take some uncontacted tribes and be like, hey guys, so do you think that this dog is cute?
What do you think of pugs?
Yeah, give them a pug. I'm sure that'll go over well.
Is this just abhorrent?
So, all right. So where I'm going with this is there's arguably some domestication, regardless of the direction. There's some domestication, and as dogs have become more docile and we've been able to selectively breed them, we can select for certain features. Is that a problem so long as the features that are being selected do not harm the animal or put it into pain or discomfort?
I think it's fine for us to breed them to select features, but we need to be careful so we don't introduce problems. For example, with American German Shepherds, a lot of them have problems with their hips. So you want to make sure if you want one that's going to be around for a long time without those problems, you probably want one that was crossbred with some other shepherd or one from Europe.
Yeah. Or similarly, any dogs with floppy ears are going to be prone to ear infections. So if you have a dog with floppy ears, you need to care right thing to do is to regularly clean out their ears and make sure that they're not getting infected.
Or you could just cut off the ears. They can't be floppy if they don't have ears.
Yeah, I'm just going to say no that.
I agree. I'm being sarcastic.
And so I the odd thing is that some traits we don't breed for, but are just come out as a process. So floppy ears are actually a really good example where the more we the breeding of dogs or wolves into dogs led to floppy ears in many contexts, even though it was never attempted to. It actually happened the same. There are species or like offshoots of foxes that have been domesticated, and they're bred for features that are preferable in domesticated animals, and in the process ended up with floppy ears. So, not because they were ever wanted, but they came out of it.
So what you're saying is that we need to be careful in what type of selective breeding we do to make sure that we don't have negative features come out in the animals that we breed.
And if there are negative features, then we need to be responsible for them. In the case of a pug, you can't really do anything about its breathing. It's that case. But in the case of a dog with floppy ears that's prone to ear infections, if you practice regular cleaning and you get allergy shots and you check on them regularly and clean them out before it becomes a problem, that dog is never in pain, that dog is never having discomfort, and it's got some absolutely adorable floppy ears.
But it's easier to make sure that it doesn't encounter those problems in the first place.
Right.
So you believe in the concept of eugenics being a good thing, yeah?
Eugenics is specifically on a human population.
Okay, but as long as it's dealing with animals, then eugenics is perfectly fine. Is that what you're saying?
I think selective breeding in an attempt to gain certain features from pets or livestock makes sense. When it comes to a human, whereas there's intelligence there and there are, I guess,
what if you could breed for intelligence? I'm putting it on the spot here, and human eugenics is a topic on its own, but that's basically what we're talking about. Is selective breeding is eugenics for animals, and we're seeing I think that domestication and selective breeding in animals is teaching us about the types of things that could happen if we start applying eugenics to humans, that it can go horribly wrong in ways that you don't expect. So to bring this back to how we got on the topic of selective breeding, we were talking about birds and clipping feathers. That is a direct modification to the animal versus a breeding modification to the animal. I think that if it results in a negative effect on the animal, both of them are really, really bad.
Yeah.
Are they equally bad?
One is going to, so clipping of a bird's wings is going to cause pain, and
you're also intentionally doing it.
Yeah.
You're actively doing it, as opposed to genetic accidents of like, okay, I didn't intend for this, floppy ears. We didn't intend for this. It's problematic, and we're going to try and take care of the animal since it's our fault, but it's not an intentional thing.
Yeah.
I think the unintentional ones are easier to live with, and it's definitely a different level than clipping a bird's wings. So with the floppy ears, okay, it was unintentional, and we tend to work around it. We try to make the dog happy and work with it. Whereas clipping the bird's wings, we did that on purpose because we don't want it to fly around. So those are very different levels. Now, something like the pug is also its own level, because we've been breeding pugs for a long time to give them that terrible flat face.
I don't want to say we, because that associates us with the people that breed pugs.
People who are breeding pugs have been breeding them for a long time.
Yeah.
And in that case, they think that they're being more true to the breed to keep the face as flat as possible without really taking the quality of life of that poor pug into account.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the quality of life of the animal needs to be taken into account.
Right. So in the case of the pug, that is very close to the bird whose wings are clipped.
I think that it's because pugs are intentionally bred for that, and it's very obvious. Like, it's not hard to tell that a pug is suffocating.
That's true. There's a reason a lot of airlines also don't fly them.
Which is?
Because of the fact that they're like suffocating like that.
Oh, that there's not enough air as
right.
you
A
go
lot of
higher
those
up.
flat-faced dogs actually can't fly.
Well,
No, 'cause
most
they clip
dogs
their
can't
wings.
fly. You've clipped
Yeah.
their wings. Actually, it in a way, yeah, you've clipped the dog's wings.
Mhm.
Yep.
They can't go on a plane.
Yeah. I mean, just looked it up while you guys were talking. Pugs their origin is actually the Ming Dynasty in China. And so they're like 500 years old that pugs have been around. I was not sure how long they'd been around. Certain breeds are in the last 100 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out pugs have been around for 500 years, somehow surviving through the malevolence of
500
humans.
years of suffocation.
Yes.
Yep.
Lovely.
Is that better than 2 years of massive famine?
Thank you, China, for these great ethical questions. So let's transition to what I really hope should be a pretty easy one. We've touched on it a little bit. Animal abuse.
That shouldn't
No.
happen.
Okay, cool. We agree. Done. No. What constitutes animal abuse?
Intentionally causing harm to an animal.
Now, hold on.
Intentionally.
Hitting a child, to an extent, so like spanking a
Ah.
child is not child abuse.
It can be considered child abuse.
If it's done excessively, yes.
In
But-
any amount in certain places, it is considered child abuse to hit a child.
Yeah.
And I would contend that that is incorrect.
There are long-lasting impacts to spanking children that have been studied and are like fairly well known in the last 50 years.
It can be overdone.
It can be overdone,
yeah.
but also any amount of it can be a bad thing. I'm not saying everyone that's been spanked as a child is going to have ill effects later in life. I'm saying that there's a good chance that if you were spanked as a child, you are, I guess, directed and potentially may have more ill effects later in life or be worse off.
Sure. And I think we're going into a lot of topics of like disciplinary action, and that should probably be an episode on its own.
Yeah. And so if we go to the animal example, is hitting a dog okay if they're doing something wrong? And you know what? I used to think it was, but I don't anymore. Dogs don't always equivocate things like cause and effect.
If a dog bites a porcupine, it's not going to bite a porcupine again.
Right. But that is because the dog very clearly did something, whereas a dog peed in the house and you hit it for it. The dog does not very rarely would understand.
You need to
Right.
be able to connect the punishment with, or the pain with the cause.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you have a cat that bites you, and not out of necessarily anger, but out of play, if it bites hard, it may be because it doesn't realize that it's biting too hard for play.
Yep.
A way of training the cat, and yes, you can train cats, is as soon as it's biting you, even if it's relatively light, scream your head off.
Yep.
Like you're in agonizing pain, and it'll realize, oh, that was not a good happy sound. That was a pain sound. I should not bite as hard because I'm just playing.
And that type of training works very well for dogs too. I've trained several dogs to not jump on people by instructing everyone that comes into the house to say, if the dog jumps on you, just scream out in pain, even if they did no harm and all you want to do is pet them. We're trying to teach this dog not to jump on you, and if they can connect jumping on someone and causing pain, then they're going to do that. And there are much nicer ways and more direct ways to train animals. For example, like the biting example, that's a really good one. Dogs that lick a lot, instead of like trying to hold them back from licking you, it's actually better to put something on your skin where they're going to lick you that they're not going to want to lick. For example, lemon juice actually works fairly well. So if
Or
they
limes.
lick you, limes, lemons, something sour where they're like, I lick you, I don't want to lick you. And doing that will teach them that, okay, you don't need to lick every single piece of exposed skin that's available. That's just people don't enjoy that.
Sure. And I think that there are a lot of creative alternatives to training animals, particularly dogs, since they're probably the most common example that we have. Barking, I know, is a problem that a lot of people have to deal with, of like, oh, someone came to the door and my dog is barking its head off obnoxiously. It's like, okay, it's hard to teach a dog to not do something. It's relatively easy to teach a dog to do something. So if you want it to not bark whenever someone comes to the door, train it to do something else, particularly something that will make its mouth busy. So, and an example of that, if someone comes to the door, teach the dog that when someone comes to the door, go get a pillow or go get a chew toy, grab that, and bring it to the door. The dog still gets to see the person.
Yeah.
He still has...
Same excitement level, but there's something in their mouth, so they get there and they've got this wonderful toy.
And they're not thinking about barking.
Right.
Right.
And you don't have to use force to be able to do it.
And that's why I believe that you don't need to be using force to, at any point, using that extensive force unless you are defending yourself. So if a dog is legitimately attacking you, or the dog is like very close to causing harm legitimately, there's a right to pull it off. There's a right to
you can
push
pull
it
off
away.
forcefully enough that it may hurt the dog
Yeah.
if it's to protect something else.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so that is those are the examples, just like you would a person. If a person is attacking you or someone else, you can use a certain amount of force that could cause harm to that person to protect yourself or someone else. Now, you can go too far with it. That person was scratching someone else, so I shot him in the head. No. So there is an extent here, but if someone's scratching someone else, do you have the right to, like...
If a cat is scratching the couch, you probably shouldn't shoot them.
Correct.
Exactly.
So what about things like shock collars?
They are effective, but they are...
I've known dogs that they'll have a shock collar on max setting and they will bark until their voice gets tired.
They can be effective. They aren't always, especially with bigger dogs. And dogs with looser skin have an amazing ability to ignore it. And that's part of the reason why, I mean, the alternatives that have been come up that are available now work with all sizes of dogs. So why put them through the pain of the shock when you could instead have
train them to do something else?
Train them to do something else. Or there are like barking collars that instead of shocking them will make an annoying noise. And so they bark and it immediately starts a high-pitched noise. So that dog's like, I don't like that. And that works for some dogs. Some other dogs, a bark collar would instead spray a mist of something that smells bad to the dog or something that the dog does not want to have near their face. And they're like, and it distracts them and it teaches them not to bark by having this something bad be sprayed there, where it's not actively causing them harm. It's more of like, I guess, discomfort.
Spraying a cat with water.
Yeah.
And you're not actively causing the cat harm by any means. You're just causing it discomfort. So there's a difference here.
Sure. And I would agree with that. Now, in terms of intentionally causing harm,
no.
So I would agree with that, but I want to bring up a specific example. Rodeos and bull riding. Do you know why the bulls are bucking as soon as they get out of the gate?
Yeah, because they're prodded.
And they were trapped and unable to move for so long.
Bull riding. Go look up pictures of bull riding. There's a rope just in front of the hindquarters that's wrapped pretty tightly against the body of the bull. The point of that rope is to squeeze the testicles of the bull to make them really, really uncomfortable and in a lot of pain, and then they stick the bull rider on top of the bull to make sure that as soon as that gate opens, that bull is going to be thrashing, jumping, trying his darndest to get whatever the heck is on his back off because his testicles are being squeezed by a rope.
Yeah, it's wrong.
Yep.
It's for the purpose of entertainment of a lot of people for the pain of one animal. Is that wrong?
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. I just wanted to bring it up as an example of intentional direct animal cruelty. There's not pleasure out of harming the animal, but it is actively harming the animal for something that results in self-pleasure and not for the sake of food. Like you're not killing the animal. Yeah, sure. Killing the animal is going to cause it some harm depending on the method of death. But this is not death. It's just, all right, I'm going to squeeze your testicles with a rope for, I don't know, a couple minutes, and then I'm going to ride you.
Some people are into that.
Those are people who can consent.
People
this
can
bull
consent
did not
to
consent.
whatever they want. We'll have the sexual content episode in a little while.
It is completely wrong with bulls, and it's completely wrong without the ability to give consent. And in humans, I mean, if you can give consent, you give consent.
Sure.
But
animals that cannot actively animals cannot consent to pain.
Yeah.
They can. Sorry. For instance, if you attach, if you have a button that shocks the animal but gives them food, animals will tolerate a shock to get food.
Animals don't have safe words.
That's true. But they can choose pain under certain circumstances. But if they are not actively choosing the pain and we inflict pain on them without the purpose of like, all right, I'm killing you or trying to help you in some way. So for instance, a dog is not going to like his shots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or for surgeries, for fixing bones, we're going to have to do something that's painful and uncomfortable for them, but for the betterment of them, that's okay. Yeah. If it's for self-entertainment and you're injuring an animal, so that's, I don't know why it's so frequently with bulls, but bull riding, bull running, you are actively causing pain and hardship and stress on the animals for the purpose of self-enjoyment.
Well, it's not only self-enjoyment, it's just enjoyment of the masses in many cases.
Yep. And I would argue that it's wrong.
Yeah, completely agree.
If we look at ourselves as intelligent enough to be the arbiters of life in general and trying to make sure that we maintain ecological stability and we're taking a conscious effort to do it, we should include in that reducing the amount of pain in animals in general, whether that be wildlife or domesticated. I think reducing pain, increasing comfort, increasing longevity and ability to live and reproduce should be our goal in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like we mentioned earlier, sometimes that means killing animals.
Yeah. In some cases, causing harm for them to be better long term. I mean, the example of giving shots. Vaccines. Great. Everyone should do it. You should vaccinate your pets. You should vaccinate your kids.
Hold on. Vaccination is a different episode, but we'll get to it.
I'm just going to make my statement here. Vaccinate your pets. Vaccinate your kids. Vaccinate yourself. That's how it should be.
Sure.
Or like an animal gets, a more like very obvious, immediate example is an animal has gotten itself stuck in barbed wire. You are going to need to cause pain to that animal to get it out of the barbed wire.
Or if it is injured to the point where you might be able to recover it, it may be better to just put the animal down.
In certain situations, yes. I mean, I've unfortunately had to have pet dogs put down because they were in a lot of pain. I most recent one, a dog that she had a lot of tumors all over her body. Just about any movement or any attempt to do anything resulted in massive amounts of pain to her. Mm-hmm. And we had to make the very tough
sometimes
decision.
Reducing pain is just to let them down.
So put them down.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to let my dog down.
Let them go, put them down.
Yeah. So those are situations that, need to be very carefully considered on whether or not it is better to put the animal out of its misery than to allow it to continue to live. But the use of pain to reduce pain, or the use of harm to reduce
temporary pain to reduce long-term pain and hardship can be good.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just inflicting pain for the purpose of inflicting pain or for your own self-benefit, that is outside the realm of acceptability.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Again, in terms of the axiom of reducing pain and increasing comfort is good.
Yes.
That we need to accept that first, but if we do accept that, those are some of the conclusions we get to, as well as intelligence increases, or as our intelligence increases, it is our duty as a species to plan for the future for the animals that don't have the capability to plan for the future, which means that we're basically appointing ourselves as the intellectual arbiters of the animal kingdom and ecological stability.
Yeah. So one thing for a future episode, but I do want to call it out in terms of that axiom, reducing pain and increasing comfort. Drug use, heroin, oh yeah, it reduces pain, it increases comfort. But that is an example that's something we'll talk about in the future, but this axiom, I guess, works well for animals, but does it carry over to humans? And
particularly around drugs, and we can talk about that.
Future episode, but I do want to call that out here as something to consider for any of those listeners that weren't offended greatly by our jokes earlier. Get thinking about that before we do that. But
to be fair,
episode.
If you're not offending someone, you're probably not talking about something meaningful.
Exactly.
That was deep.
Is there anything else you guys want to cover?
Nope, I think we hit it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
And we were just talking a lot about putting pets down, though. Where's that cat? I want to pet her and hug her.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to this discussion. Your interest really means a lot to us. If you want to help support this podcast and our goal of sparking discussions and bringing people together, check out how to contribute in the description. Happy deeping!
The content of this podcast does not reflect the views and opinions held by anyone involved. We will frequently be playing the devil's advocate strictly for the purpose of exploration of ideas and not as an endorsement of any subsequent action. We condemn all acts of violence other than those of self-defense against physical harm.